Now, it's interesting that just about every problem that we have in the world today in relation to environment will be made worse by having more people. Can you think of any of them that would actually be made better by having more people? Of course not. And the quality of life, which is so important for us, some Australians would say is going down. I think our hospitals and our hospital waiting times, we have better technology, you can get scanned for everything and those things, but our quality of the hospital care has gone down because we haven't kept up with this incredible population expansion. Our expansion last year from immigration and births was about 480,000, around about the population of Tasmania. Now Tasmania has over 3 public hospitals, big major public hospitals. So if we're going to increase our population by that next year, we need to put in 3 big major public hospitals. We need to put in 170 high schools each year. We're not doing that. And I go back to this thing, why would you want to? It's interesting, when I return from overseas, not just Bangladesh, but from the United States, I love getting to Sydney. In fact, what I love even better is going to either Adelaide or Hobart to the international airport. It's hardly an international airport in Hobart. They once did have a flight from Auckland. But the interesting thing is that you get out and you think, oh, this is nice. You only have to walk about 10 feet to the rent-a-car. There's not this huge barrage of vehicles going past with recorded messages like in Los Angeles. It does look a bit like a country town. And I say to the people in Hobart and South Australia and Adelaide, you're very lucky. Because those cities have an efficiency of scale. Now, they don't have the latest Broadway shows, but they certainly have an efficiency of scale which gives the people a high standard of living, but without some of the enormous disadvantages we have here in Sydney. I used to catch the train to school every morning from Roseville to North Sydney. North Sydney Tech I went to, and the trains weren't that crowded. Recently, making the documentary, I climbed on the train, and one difference was in those days no one knew me, and these days everyone did. But you could hardly, it was standing room only. And people say, oh, well, you can put in double-decker train, double-decker rail tracks. My attitude is, why would you want to do that? Now, if we're actually going to talk about not increasing our population, you would have seen the figure, Kelvin Thomson, he believes about 26 million. I have to use a terrible word. That means we would have to actually operate in Australia without growth. And we all know that our system is addicted to growth. We will throw a government out. It's not just the wealthy capitalists who have benefited from growth. And I should tell you that I'm known to have made money out of publishing, Australian Geographic, and out of electronics. But in fact, I've made more money out of property investment in Sydney. I have industrial and commercial properties in Sydney. You'd have to be a complete mug not to have been able to make money when the population's gone from about 7 million when I started in Australia to over 22 million. But having said that, selfishly, I've got another maybe 10, 15 years to live. Well, if growth keeps, I'm going to be worth even more money. But what about my children and grandchildren? Isn't that important to most wealthy people? And this is one of the ways, when we get a leader of calibre, and I'll talk about that in a mention, and we will one day, I think it's probably 10 years away, that leader is going to be able to say to the wealthy people, yes, your wealth will not increase as it's done in the past, but you're pretty wealthy now, especially if you're a billionaire, which many of them are. What about your children and grandchildren? Wouldn't you be concerned if at the end of their lives, possibly they won't be starving because we're a wealthy country, we'll be able to buy the food at very high cost. But if they watch on television every night, not a billion malnourished people, which we have now, but hundreds of millions of people starving, dying from starvation. What will our young people think if it's not thousands of people trying to come to our country, it's millions? Because that's what could happen if we continue this addiction to growth. Now, as a capitalist, I can tell you that if you have growth, especially population growth, it's an easy way of making more money. If you're the CEO of Woolworths, you've got this pressure from the shareholders, the mums and dads shareholders, superannuation, increase your profit every year, increase your profit every year. You will be thrown out if you don't increase the profit every year. So be careful about just complaining about the wealthy. It's the mums and dads who will sell their shares on advice of their financial advisors if this particular company isn't growing. And if you're the MD of Woolworths or Coles, it's really easy to grow if the population's growing. It's a mugs. It's like the money I've made out of property. But let's say the population is stabilised at 26 million. Would capitalism still exist? Well, of course it would. In fact, it'll be a similar situation to the 1830s, where we had slavery. Slavery had been in existence for thousands of years. And some good, sensible people in England decided that it was immoral, it should be removed. Now, in those days, there was tremendous pressure from the business community saying, if you abolish slavery, not only will capitalism collapse, but the slaves will starve. They won't have any money or any food that we're giving them now. Of course, slavery was abolished. Capitalism actually existed and thrived. The Industrial Revolution came in. There are countries now which don't have an expansion in population. Japan has a population going backwards. From 120 million, they believe it's going to end up at 90 million. People say how terrible this is. I think it's fantastic. Yes, they have big economic problems in Japan. Their values of buildings have dropped 60%. Wow, that means young couples can afford to buy a house again. But what's happening in Japan, it's completely unplanned, because here they are, this addiction to growth, and it's going the reverse way. Japan is not a country that's ever availed itself of large amounts of immigration, and also the young women in Japan, like young educated women everywhere in the world, are having less kids. And so here you have, they say it's a problem, and most of my wealthy friends say, look at Japan, what a disaster. I went particularly to Japan last year and drove across it and caught the trains, which I love, and there's no suit queues. You wouldn't know that there was this so-called economic problem. And I've heard it criticised that in one little town in Oshima Island, the dentist is 84 years of age and the taxi driver's 86 and the hairdresser's 72. Isn't this terrible? I thought it was fantastic. I mean, in other words, they've all got these people who are doing work because they want to. So, if we are going to go to a stable population, it's going to require some expert management. It's going to require planning. And it's similar planning to the tough environmental laws. Capitalists, we used to just whack all our pollution into the harbour. If we were running the ICI plant at Botany Bay, we're all running to Botany Bay. Laws were brought in which said you can't do that. Now, the reason it didn't affect capitalism that much is the laws created an even playing field. No one could do that. And we said, if you do it, you'll be put in jail. So the threats were great. And exactly the same thing can happen if, let's say, a government says we're only going to go to 26 million, the capitalists will scream. We, of course, need a new way of measuring our success. At the moment, we use GDP, gross domestic product. And if it doesn't increase at 2 or 3% per year, we say, oh, we're in recession, throw the government out, it's a disaster. And of course, that isn't necessarily so. In the long term, it might be the best thing that could ever happen. When we get this leader, a leader similar to the person who abolished slavery, it'll be a younger person, I believe, that they'll say, we're going to have a new measure of our success. It's not going to be tied up with growth, it's going to be tied up with quality of life. There's various ways of measuring it around the world. And let's say we decided on $26 million, the figure that Kelvin Thomson has talked about. 26 million, is it? I think, yeah. Well, there'd be screams from big business. I meet my business colleagues from time to time and they say, oh, Dick, you know, I don't really like what you're doing about this population. So they're very worried about it. Because if you are an owner of a public company, you're Rupert Murdoch, you know that what you need is growth every year in your shares, otherwise the share value will go down. You just cannot envisage a time when you don't have growth. But it's interesting, I haven't been able to get one politician to admit, one politician who's in a cabinet position, that you can't have growth always.